The 2020 US presidential election was arguably one of the most consequential elections in US history. This election was very controversial and divisive due to the surge in popularity of the BLM movement and COVID 19. As someone who will be turning 18 this year, I paid remarkably close attention to this year's election. As a future voter, it is my responsibility to pay attention to the political climate to make informed opinions about foreign politics, especially since US politics affects Canada so significantly. This year, I noticed how prevalent politics were in social media, from celebrities using their platform to tell people to vote, to people spreading awareness about BLM through varying social media platforms. Social media was riddled with politics and social issues during 2020. I cannot help but notice that a lot of people in my age demographic were learning a lot about politics just through social media and the internet. Then I learned that the 2020 US presidential election had an increase in the number of young Americans who voted. I started wondering how the growth of the internet had affected the young voter population's voter turnout. About 10 million people of the ages 18 to 29 voted before Election Day itself. Roughly 53% of eligible voters in that age range voted, which is an 8% increase from 2016's election. 17% of the 2020 votes came from the youth voters, as opposed to 16% in 2016. The Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement credits the youth vote for Joe Biden's victory. The internet was created in 1983, and the increase in internet access came with the increase in access to technology. So, to study how the growth of the internet affected the youth voter turnout, I will be analyzing data surrounding the access to technology from 1984 to 2018 for people of the ages 18 to 24, voter registration numbers from 1984 to 2018 for people of the ages 18 to 24, and voting numbers, federal elections, including midterms, from 1984 to 2018 for people of the ages 18 to 24. The information derived from this research will be most relevant to young voters or to-be voters like me, to be aware of how people in their generation, the future leaders, are involved in politics. This information is also valuable to politicians so they know how to pander to the young voter population. Just based on how aware the internet has made me of the political landscape, I hypothesize that as usage of the internet has grown through the increase in access to technology over the years, the youth voter registration and turnout has increased as well. Hence, I think that the growth in access to technology and youth voter turnout will have a strong positive correlation. Prior to comparing the multiple variables in this study, it is important to get a full understanding of each variable on its own. The box and whisker plot on the left displays the percentage of voters of the ages 18 to 24 who voted from 1984 to 2018. The box and whisker plot shows that the median is skewed slightly higher than the mean. On average, from 1984 to 2018, 29.43% of the youth voter population had voted. I chose the mean to be the best measure of central tendency to represent this data, as there is a lack of outliers and the standard deviation is low, meaning the data points tend to cluster around the mean. The box and whisker plot on the left displays the percentage of voters of the ages 18 to 24 who registered to vote from 1984 to 2018. The box and whisker plot shows that the median is almost equal to the mean. On average, from 1984 to 2018, 45.6% of the youth voter population had registered to vote. Since the mean and median are so close, I can assume that the data is symmetrically distributed. The box and whisker plot on the left displays the percentage of people of the ages 18 to 24 who had access to technology from 1984 to 2018. The box and whisker plot shows that the median is much higher than the mean, meaning the data is negatively skewed. On average, from 1984 to 2018, 75.55% of the youth had access to technology. I chose the median to be the best measure of central tendency to represent this data, as there are outliers and the standard deviation is high, meaning the data points are very spread out. The correlation coefficient of the voting numbers of the youth is only negative 0.015. This means there is not much indication that there is any trend in this set of data. This is visually represented on the graph by how close the line of best fit is to being a horizontal line. The amount of youth who voted over these years has not increased or decreased steadily. The correlation coefficient of the voting registration numbers of the youth is only negative 0.001. This means there is not much indication that there is any trend in this set of data. This is visually represented on the graph by how close the trend line is to being a horizontal line. The amount of youth who registered to vote over the years has stayed within the range of 38 to 53%. The correlation coefficient of the number of people who have had access to technology over the years is 2.76, which is extremely high. The positive slope indicates the correlation is positive. The slope being higher than 1 indicates that the correlation is strong. This is visually represented on the graph by the steepness of the trend line, which travels upwards. This indicates a strong positive correlation. The number of youth who had access to technology has increased greatly over these years. Overall, we can conclude that there is almost no correlation between the growth in access to technology and the number of youths who register to vote or actively vote. I do not think that this necessarily discredits the role technology plays in encouraging people, especially the youth, to vote. I think that the data that I have presented just indicates that there are many more factors that play much more heavily into whether people vote or not. When observing the data revolving around voting and voting registration, it seems to go up and down every 2 years. This is because midterm elections are not widely popular unless people tend to vote or register to vote around that time. If I were to conduct this study again, I would exclude or separate the midterm election numbers to discover more of a trend. All the raw data presented in this study comes from the American Census, which aims to consider the entire population of the United States and is mostly accurate. Apart from a general margin of error, the census sometimes fails to incorporate the entire population of America due to its inability to recognize refugees, people without citizenships, and complex living situations. The honesty of citizens is not heavily regulated, so answers can be falsified, affecting the numbers in relation to access to technology. However, the numbers in relation to voting and voter registration is accurate, with a small margin of random human error. I had to assume that everyone who had access to technology had access to the same quality of technology for the same amount of time. I also had to assume that having access to technology is related to having internet access as well, which is not necessarily always the case. Now, knowing that technology does not really play much of a part in voting and voter registration, I cannot help but wonder what factors profoundly affect the voting habits of the youth. I hypothesize that major events seem to play a significant role. The destruction of the World Trade Center in 2001 was followed by the 2004 election, where we can see a 9% increase in voter turnout from the youth. Then, there was the 2007 to 2008 financial crisis, which was followed by the 2008 election, in which there was a 3% increase since 2004. If I were to further research this topic, I think it would be interesting to see how social media affects the voter turnout and who they vote for. We have already seen how social media plays a huge role in informing the public about politics in this year's election. The entire 2016 election was majorly affected by a sole social media platform, Facebook. Hence, as social media becomes increasingly prevalent, it will be interesting to study how this affects how people vote.